All right, let's briefly talk about the Alito thing, because I also want, we only get about, 6, 7, 8 minutes. And I want to be able to talk about the sort of the meta story here, which I think is really indicative of something that's going on in the court that I think is a process that's not going away.
Yeah, so the Alito thing is startling because, as the New York Times reported, and I think this is correct, it was unprecedented in the history of the court. Sometimes when the justices are writing opinions, one justice or two justices will flip their positions. So whoever was authoring the majority opinion will lose the majority opinion, and somebody new will write it because the outcome has flipped, right? But we now know that in the Fisher case, which was a case about whether federal prosecutors could charge many January 6th defendants under an obstruction statute, including Donald Trump, by the way. He was one of the January 6th defendants charged under the statute. Whether those charges could survive, whether the existing convictions could survive, or whether prosecutors in the federal government misread the obstruction statute and read it too broadly, and that a lot of these charges and convictions had to fail. And we now know that Alito was originally assigned to write the opinion saying that federal prosecutors did go too far, that the obstruction statute was narrower, that a lot of these January 6th defendants did deserve to be let off the hook, at least for this charge. But after the story came out that a upside down American flag hung over his household shortly after January 6th, that Roberts just seized the opinion from him and said, surprise, everyone, I'm now authoring this opinion, was not changing the outcome in any meaningful way. It was not some kind of flip behind the scenes. Roberts just said, this is now my case. And I think that just shows he doesn't care about ethics as an important thing in itself. He cares about optics, and he knew that the optics of Alito writing this opinion would be bad. So he took it over.
It seems to me to be a de facto acknowledgement that Alito should have recused himself.
Right. But there's no indication that Roberts pressured Alito to recuse. Certainly, Roberts didn't provide any kind of public statement that Alito should recuse, or any indication. I mean, my sense is that Roberts thinks all this ethics stuff is bogus, that it's just, sore losers on the left using whatever fodder they can to criticize the court. So he said, well, instead of, doing any kind of truly ethical move here and pressuring Sam to take himself off this case, I'll just write it instead. Really damning. And before we move on to the meta story, I just want to add the third case here, because it is a trio, and it's kind of like similar to both of these other two that we've discussed. This was the case about Trump getting removed from the ballot in Colorado, right? A case that Clarence Thomas should not have participated in because his own wife was, at the ellipse on January 6th, played a role in trying to overturn the election. The Colorado Supreme Court said that Trump couldn't run again because he had engaged in insurrection. And we now know that behind the scenes, actually, the 4 women justices, including Amy Coney Barrett, so the 3 liberals and Barrett, wanted to issue a very narrow, modest decision that would have narrowly said that what Colorado did here in this way was not allowed, but not opined on the broader issue. The 4 men, Kavanaugh, Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, wanted to issue a sweeping decision that would essentially protect Trump from ever facing real consequences for his electoral future for participating in January 6th. And Roberts had a choice. He could have gone with the 4 women, or he could have gone with the 4 men to his right. And he went with the 4 men. And he authored a sweeping decision that basically nullified a clause of the 14th Amendment that said insurrectionists can't return to office. Just another example of Roberts ignoring major ethical issues in his own house in the Supreme Court, right? And then deciding to cast his lot with the most extreme possible outcome when he had options for compromise right there on the table.
Okay. So let's talk about the fact that we know this, because as far as I can remember, I can list off 2 other times where there have been leaks. The ACA decision back, I guess this was in 2012, there was somebody leaked, I think it was to the Wall Street Journal, and it was somebody clearly upset that Roberts was sort of not going far enough or something to that effect, or was bitching about Roberts, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, we had the big Dobbs leak. The leak of the decision. But even prior to the decision, somebody was talking who knew inside stuff. I think it was to Wall Street Journal again. So here we have a and I think it's important to note, like, people have relationships with specific media outlets, and conservatives tend to have relationships with places like the Wall Street Journal. And I'm now guessing that maybe some liberals have some relationships with the New York Times. We're looking at emails that are going back and forth here. We're looking like internal documents that we never, ever, ever see. And I'm curious as to like how you think, like, what's going on that this is being leaked.
So from everything I know covering the court for more than a decade, I can tell you with a lot of confidence, these kind of leaks, this level of leak does not happen unless a justice authorizes someone to leak it. I think it is very clear from the material we have and the way that it is framed and the level of detail that we were given that a justice authorized a leak to the New York Times. Maybe one, maybe two. I think almost certainly, based on what was leaked, a justice on the left, but, you know, we can't say for certain. And, you know, because I ultimately am still sort of guessing here, I want to preserve the possibility that maybe some former clerks went rogue after their term ends. You know, the clerk changeover happens in July, and I think it's notable that this story came out in mid-September. That would leave just the right amount of time for former clerks who clerked last term to go to the New York Times and leak this information and have the New York Times, you know, report this story out. If that is what happened, then the timing just lines up. It's always possible that someone who happened to have information behind the scenes went rogue again and was not authorized by a justice, but it really rarely happens. I mean, I'm still convinced that Clarence Thomas authorized the leaks about the ACA decision in 2012, and that either Clarence Thomas or Sam Alito authorized the leaks about Dobbs before the draft was actually released, you know, to the public in the big leak. And so here I think there's a real chance that a liberal justice is so fed up with what's happening that they're doing the kind of 5-alarm fire thing, and that they're saying, you know, we can't just leave this to our dissenting opinions to express our concern here. We need the American people to be reading the crap that's going on behind the scenes. You know, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch showering Roberts with sycophancy, Roberts getting MAGA pilled and going all in for Trump. The people need to see what's going on so that they understand that this is a court that's been corrupted by politics. Again, I'm not speaking from any inside information. I was not privy to these leaks, and Jody Cantor and Adam Liptak have not told me how they got them, nor will they, nor should they. But my sense is that this was at a minimum greenlit or sort of eyebrow raise and wink approved by a justice to get to the media and get to the public.
My speculation, based upon maybe even less, is exactly the same. And although I will add that, you know, and maybe this is just my nature in terms of like, seeing a little more drama or intrigue, we should note that there was an investigation that lasted for months and months and months as to who leaked the Dobbs decision, and presumably who would have contacted the Wall Street Journal so they could write about what was happening with the Dobbs decision before it was leaked. And the court apparently, despite the fact that they have just about every single possible investigatory resource available to human beings on the planet, because they could go to the NSA. I mean, like, the idea that there's no, that this trail just went cold, I find really hard to believe. And I can't help but wonder if the liberal justices saw like, oh, okay, you're not going to hold Alito to account for this, then the gloves are off, because we all know who did this. It seems to me that on the court, they must all be fairly clear on, you know, who did what. And they're basically saying, now we get to do a couple of these too. And it just strikes me that, and I think we saw a couple of weeks ago, Kagan was out there saying that we think there should be some type of reform, or at least I do, in terms of ethics. Like, this war that seems to be going on, like it's erupting in a way that I don't think we've seen At least I haven't, since reports in the summer of 2001 that the court had a serious rift in the wake of the Bush v. Gore ruling.
I agree that it must be a very poisonous atmosphere behind the scenes. And I'll just add, the investigation after the Dobbs leak was a total joke. It was not designed to produce any meaningful information. It ended up being sort of like a witch hunt. They, searched the clerks' phones. They didn't do any real under oath interviews with the justices themselves. They basically ensured that the justices would get off scot-free and wouldn't face any real scrutiny. One of the only true impacts of that leak and the follow-up and the investigation and the report is that the court told us the universe of employees who are going to have access to these internal deliberations is going to get smaller. We're going to reduce the number of people within the court who can see the deliberations and the draft opinions and, the justices' conversations to try to avoid a leak happening like this again, which tells us that if there is a leak, as there now has been, that there is an even greater chance that the person who either provided the materials or authorized the materials to be leaked was a justice or someone very close to a justice. That, lower level and even mid-level employees are no longer privy to this information, and they can kind of be taken off the suspect list. And I think an unintended consequence of that was to make it easier for us, the public, to take a very strong educated guess about who is giving this material to the press.
Yeah, somebody inside the court is basically saying, we've got a problem here. And it's clear that the Biden administration had no interest in sort of going down this road. Donald Trump obviously put these people on there, so he's like, okay, mission accomplished. But I wonder if this type of stuff being leaked, there have to be people within the Harris camp, people are obviously involved in a campaign. But this is not going to go unnoticed by this is you're basically watching one if not three of the Supreme Court justices, it seems to me, saying, we're sending up a warning signal. Here's a flare. People should start following this a little bit because they did this for a reason, yes. Not just so that we could have some interesting weekend reading. Somebody on the Supreme Court is doing this for a reason. And I wonder if it's to change some minds on the Senate judiciary, too.
I think that is almost certainly correct. And I think that if Kamala Harris happens to win a congressional majority and the presidency, that they should take a hard look at the warning signs coming left and right from the Supreme Court and ask themselves, do we really want to ignore the fact that these liberal justices may be putting themselves on the line here to warn us and the public that something must be done or we're heading in an even darker direction?
Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer at Slate, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. We will link to this piece by you and Dahlia Lithwick at majority.fm.
Thanks.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.